Hello friends, today I have a fun challenge. This was my husband's idea. He wanted to go through my craft room and pick out supplies for me, kind of like the chop challenge but for crafting. So he picked out my 5x7 gel plate, a black and green alcohol marker. He picked out these two alcohol inks, Sunset Orange and Gumball by Ranger. Then there's some acrylic paint. He did the aqua and gray acrylic paint. He did include a distress ink in lumberjack plaid or oxide, and then the ink in faded jeans, some perfect pearls, the purple, the blue, and the green, some 91% alcohol in a mini mister, silver foil, and this magnolia bouquet hot foil set and die set, some leafy swirl embossing folder, and some stamps. These are retired, but they're just different travel stamps. So that's what I have to work with. Challenge accepted. So now I'm trying to figure out what I'm going to make. He did say I have to make a card at the end of this, and I have to use every one of the paints, inks, dies. So all of those had to be used, but of the stamps in the die set, I didn't have to use every single thing, just something from each of those sets. So here I'm formulating my plan, trying to decide. I've got these cut out die pieces that I'm thinking maybe I'll use as a mask on my jelly plate. And then through my mask, maybe I can use my perfect pearls to kind of create that shape on the plate. So that's what I did. I cut out from some cardstock, just those three flower pieces. And then I'm gonna just go ahead and put my pearl powder in the flowers, but I knew I needed to use all three colors. So as I was going along, I was trying to be careful not to fill in the entire flower so I could get the other colors in there. So this was a really fun challenge. It was very challenging for me. I had no plan, not even an idea of what my finished product was going to look like. So this is literally just kind of thinking through what am I going to do and how am I going to incorporate all the pieces. I'll say the hardest pieces to try to incorporate into this challenge were the two colors of the distress inks. One was an ink and one was an oxide, and those alcohol ink markers, just the others, the pearls, the paints, those all I could see using on the gel plate, but the other items were a little more challenging for me to figure out how to make it all work together. So as I was kind of coloring in these flowers, I was kind of scheming what I would do next. One thought that I had was the magnolia glimmer foil. I thought I would go ahead and, after I pull this print, put those magnolia flowers with the silver foil over those. I didn't realize it at the time, but I had put my mask on kind of backwards so that when I pull my print, the design would be backwards, I guess. And that made it so that I wouldn't be able to do the foiling on top of the gel print. So this was definitely like a trial and error challenge, and there were definitely errors along the way. But as we say in crafting, there are no mistakes. So I kind of just worked through each of these little challenges. Alright, after carefully removing my stencil, I went ahead and used my gray colored acrylic paint. I put a little dab of acrylic on the plate, thinking I was just going to cover the three flowers. Here's error number 2, let's say. I had too thin of a coat of paint. It was not enough paint to pull my design. So after I pressed that down, because the paint was already starting to dry because it was so thin, by the time I pulled my print up, it wasn't enough stickiness to really get the perfect pearls to adhere to the paper. So I would say that was my first kind of flop. Here I am noticing that it wouldn't work out anyway because they were on the wrong way. Here I pulled a thicker coat of paint, again just kind of testing out what thicker paint would look like. I liked that better. So here I did it again, but this time I flipped my little template over so that they would be pulled in the correct direction when I was done applying my perfect pearls. If you're enjoying this video, please subscribe and like this video so it gets out to more people. And if you're not a subscriber already, I do like to make Gelli Print different cards and projects, and I also enjoy doing alcohol inks and Ranger Tim Holtz type projects. So here we are, I'm filling in these perfect pearls once again, kind of in the same way that I had done it the first time. I'm going to use that same gray color paint over the top. This time I'm using a much thicker coat. I'm just going to apply it to the whole plate. Then I'm going to use this texture that I had created from my embossing folder onto that cardstock. Just going to get that little leaf texture in there. Now I'm applying another piece of cardstock to pull up the perfect pearl image. And I am letting that dry on the plate just a little bit, just so that it will really adhere to the paper. So this one turned out a lot better than my first try. And now I wanted to go ahead and foil on top of those little flower pieces. So I did cut down my foil just to fit over my little shapes, my flower shapes. And here, to make sure they lined up correctly, I'm just using some tape, like a hinge, and I'm putting the foil behind it. Now, normally, this is where I mess up. I normally put the foil on the wrong way, and I end up foiling my plates instead of my paper. I didn't do that this time. I did it the correct way, so I was proud of myself. However, I did still mess up. Here's where you're supposed to flip it over and have the plates facing, or the die cut pieces facing the heat, and the paper should be facing up. I had it backwards and didn't realize it, so I went ahead and let the timer run out. I ran it through my die cut machine, and I didn't realize until I pulled away the paper that I made a mistake. So let's see what that looks like. This is when I knew I made a mistake. I could see the impression through the paper, and that doesn't normally happen. So I didn't know what to expect. Here I thought the whole foil piece was going to be stuck, but it was only the foil pieces that were stuck to the foil that were all the way through. Now what should have happened is it should have just done the outline in foil, and then the rest of it should have showed the perfect pearls. And here I just had 3 full foiled pieces, which in and of itself, I kind of thought, this is kind of cool. I didn't even realize I could do this on my heat press, that I could run it through the other way. It may not be recommended, but if you're looking to fill out an entire piece in foil, this is an accident that maybe I might try again in the future on purpose. So back to the challenge, I'm just kind of creating my card base. I am still formulating what I'm going to do next. I knew I needed to incorporate those alcohol inks, the pink and the orange, so I went ahead and just started creating an alcohol ink background over the leftover pearls that are still on my plate. I'm using that mini mister with the 91% alcohol in it to kind of get those to move a little bit, and my blower just to kind of blend them out. Now, as alcohol ink is drying on the plate, there's a kind of a small window where you want to pull any texture. If it's dry, it won't pull the texture. If it's too wet, it kind of smears the texture. So I'm just lightly tapping in this textured embossed piece just to get some of those leaf shapes in the background, and just kind of picking out different shapes on this texture that I liked. Once I was happy with that, I let the whole thing dry. Then I'm going to go back in with that gray color one more time. And again, using a pretty hefty coat of paint here. Here you could feel that the paint was wet through the paper, so I did let my paper dry quite a bit. I kind of walked away for a minute or two and then came back, and it was adhered nicely to my paper. I really liked how this turned out with the orange and the pink. Had the pearl powders in the design as well, had some of that texture in the background from the leaves. So I feel like I was making some progress here, but I still needed to use this aqua color paint. I needed to use my distress inks and my stamps. So kind of formulating what I wanted to do next. My idea here was using my gel plate as kind of like a base of paint, and then I was going to pull the stamps from this base of coat of paint. So I'll show you what I mean by that. I needed to have a decent amount of paint, but it shouldn't be too thick that it was going to not leave a clear impression. So it couldn't be too thin either, because it couldn't be too dry to pull the paint up. So at this point I realized the paint was too dry on the plate. I had to apply a little bit more. And I decided to stop right there because this was going to be too dry if I kept going. So this was a nice amount of paint, not too much, not too little. And then I just started taking my stamps and kind of pressing them into the paint and leaving behind that texture on the plate. So my first few times doing this with these stamps, I would just pull the stamp up and move it to another piece on the plate with the now wet paint on the stamp. And as you can see, it wasn't leaving as good of an impression by the fourth time around. It didn't quite dawn on me at this point that I needed to stamp off the extra paint before stamping it again on the plate. So just learning as I'm going here. Then I started stamping it off and coming back to the plate, and I realized, oh, I got a better impression that way. So that was aha moment number one. And then as I was going along, stamping off the extra onto a scrap piece of paper, I realized the impression it was leaving behind on the scrap piece of paper was actually really good. So better than I would get with a distress ink stamp of this tiny, because it's such a small, fine print on a lot of these stamps that distress inks kind of blur out the details, but this acrylic ink was really capturing the detail So I decided to use that to my benefit and start applying it onto my little pink background pieces that I had kind of cut down into two little pieces here, because I decided at this point I was going to make 2 cards. The acrylic ink will stick to your stamps, so as I was doing this, I was kind of pausing the video, going and rinsing out my stamps after I did about 3 or 4 stamp impressions before the paint would dry on my stamps. So if you are going to do something like this, just make sure you either have a thing of water nearby that you can place your stamps into. You just don't want that acrylic ink drying onto your stamps. It can ruin them. So I thought this part was really fun, just kind of stamping out onto my little background pieces that I was going to use, plus I was removing the ink on the gel plate, and that created these holes or openings. So I let that paint dry on the plate all the way. Then I decided, since the pearls on my little background pieces weren't going to be too visible, I would incorporate the pearls onto this background piece as well. So I just added all 3 colors behind these little stamped out images. Okay, taking that same gray color. The reason I like using the gray on the background of this is it will kind of show the colors kind of brightly through, whereas with the blue, I didn't want to have the same color pulling it back up again. So I thought this would give it a little bit of contrast. Okay, so this is what the pearled background behind the aqua blue painted stamped out images look like. I cut that down for my 2 cards, and then I wanted to work on my sentiments for my card titles. So I cut them out of this scrap piece of paper that I had used earlier, and just went ahead and wanted to use my Distress Oxide on the one. So this one's going to be red for the journey title. Then I decided, let's mix it up a little, put some of the blue as a little bit of an accent piece, and flipped it over and did the same for my next title, which is Explore. This one I did in the Faded Jeans blue. And then after I got a good impression with the blue, the Distress ink was a little bit harder to get a good impression. Then I went in with the red on the edges and kind of captured the opposite effect. I cut those pieces out, and then I wanted to make them into a little bit of a banner shape. So I'm just cutting out some 2 little triangle pieces towards the center to create my little banner. So the things that I was allowed to use that were not in the box, I could use any kind of paper that I wanted, and I was allowed to use any kind of string if needed. So looking at these, I felt these needed some twine, so I found this gold and white twine in my stash and thought this would kind of go nicely with these little banners. I folded the flat side in just a little bit. Then I measured out my twine to kind of go the length of the card. Then I did that same thing to the other title. So to adhere these little string pieces, before I did that, I realized I needed a little more of those two colors in my design. They weren't very obvious that I'd used those, so I decided to do a little bit of ink blending with the blue on the one title and then the red on the other title. Okay, these are coming along. I just went ahead and glued that string inside that little fold, folded it over the string to kind of seal it in there. I was trying to make sure the end pieces were fairly even, because my idea next was, after that dried just a little bit, I wanted to tie them together. And I just did that by doing a double knot. Since I liked how that turned out, I just went ahead and repeated those steps on my next title. And now I'm ready to assemble everything. I used some foam squares to give a little bit of dimension to the title or sentiment pieces. I used the foam tape on the flowers. I glued the blue straight to the background. For the first one, I went to the upper right corner. Kind of measured it against the top and the right side. For the second card, I measured to the bottom left corner. And then after applying foam tape to the back of this pink printed alcohol background, I lined that up with the top right corner. Adhered my silver flower, offset it just a little bit so the pearls were like a shadow behind it. And then put on my sentiment piece. trying to figure out where I wanted it, I decided I wanted a little bit on the blue and a little bit on the pink and orange background. Kind of halfway. So that's looking pretty good so far. Let's just repeat that on the other card base. Just basically going through the kind of opposite steps, but lining everything up kind of in the similar fashion. So here I thought I was done. What am I missing? Yes, I'm missing my alcohol ink markers. That's what I did not use. So I have the black and the green markers that I still have to incorporate. So I went ahead and took those 2 areas of white spaces on each of the cards and kind of drew in a little design. This was kind of a design right here in my little background that looked like a little leaf vine. So I decided to kind of mimic that and draw that on the little white spaces in green. And then for my black, I just used the fine tip side and kind of drew in just the vine part. And then thought it might look cool to kind of outline these little embellished background pieces. I could have done something like stitching, but at the time, I just decided to go with a straight line, kind of outlining the orange and the blue pieces. Okay, so I thought I was done here, but realized those little green leaves just kind of looked off, not having the black around them. So I decided to draw the black around each of those little leaves. And then that completed out my 2 cards for this challenge. So I would call this challenge accepted and challenge completed. So here are my 2 finished projects for this challenge that my husband had for me. So what do you think? Did I nail it? Did I not nail it? I didn't think I was going to finish this challenge, and I really didn't think it was going to turn out as anything I was going to be proud of. So I think, having said that, I really do like how these turned out. Hope you find a fun challenge in your crafty life. Until next time, happy crafting!